Let's switch to English since our guest today is from, it's, from, I let Samir tell you where you're from, but you live in and operate in London. So we have to switch to English, which is not our native language. So I kindly ask my guest to speak a slow English, which is beautiful English, by the way, of Samir. So I'm happy to have you today. Thank you for coming to this Wylab Innovation Talk, which is very important if you are into sports. Sports is, I would say, transitioning to a very, very, I would say, difficult, challenging phase. We have macroeconomical things that are happening. We have demographical changes in the consumption of sports. We have geopolitical things that are coming up, and sport is in between. So we need to figure out a new, I would say, innovative, I would say, sustainable and competitive business model for sports. And I think today we have a very special guest, Samir Ceric, with us, and we would like to go through these changes in the business and see what's happened.
Abbiamo perso.
It doesn't happen often, but apologies.
Technology
Connection. So I'm not, now it should work. So I was saying, I don't know what you got from my introduction, but sport is living this big change, and we would like to discuss these changes with Samir. I think this is interesting for anyone who loves sports, but not necessarily works in sports, because sports has connection with very many different verticals: fintech, sustainability, infrastructure, travel, media entertainment, inclusion, so many different things, and media entertainment. So even though you don't work in sports, I think it's super interesting to understand where we're going. So we had the main question for today's talk was, how come, why Amazon is valuable $2 trillion something, whereas big top sports organization with millions, hundreds of millions of fans, Juventus, Real Madrid, Manchester United, whatever it is, Barcelona, Real Madrid, generate a small fraction of those revenues and value. Of course, I would say, it's a provoking questions. We know that Amazon, you can compare Amazon with the football club, but we know that sports capable of appropriate or generate revenues, enough revenues, considering all the fans that are interested in the game, that are loyal to this sport. And let's consider the World Cup. We have seen the World Cup, how many people are involved in this World Cup, but sport is kind of poor in this fashion. So I think the main franchise, the most important franchise in the US, are valuable around 10 billion. I'm not sure, but not far from that, 10 or something like that. But in any case, it's a small fraction. So that's the main question. We would like to discuss why sports isn't capable of to value more than that. Samir, welcome to the show. And I met with Samir in 2022 in Tel Aviv, if I'm not mistaken. We were at a startup, sports tech startup exhibition, very interesting. And we met there and something clicked. We felt kind of friends from the beginning, if I can say, and then we kept in touch, and we meet occasionally during sports tech events, and we kept this friendship. And so I think he is apart from this, he's an investor, he's an entrepreneur, is expert in all things startups and innovation. He's a pro handball player, by the way. He's a pro player in sports. He has a vast experience in startups. He is, let's say, expert in medtech, fintech, and many other things. And he works within innovation in sports. He has had a role in a startup that I know, which is called Block Sport. So he has lots to do with blockchain and something like that. So it's very much related to innovation. And we share also the fact that we've spent time in the same, well, we spent time, we've graduated at the same university, Università di Bologna, alma mater. So Samir, welcome to the Wylab Innovation Talks, and thanks for being with us.
Grazie Federico. Ragazzi, un gran piacere essere oggi con voi. Purtroppo non faremo la conversazione in italiano, siccome mi manca un po' di pratica, quasi 30 anni da quando mi sono laureato in matematica all'Università di Bologna, così continuiamo in inglese. Thank you so much, Federico. Good to be here. I think you touched on so many interesting topics that I'm very much looking forward to exchange my views with you, and hopefully get the audience to ask lots of questions in relation to, something you mentioned, that $1 trillion uh, football club. I've been sort of very vocal about the fact that I believe in our lifetime, in the coming couple of decades, we will witness $1 trillion football club or sporting property in general. And you use the analogy that I often use, that Amazon with 315 million customers at 2 trillion plus versus Manchester United, 1.2 billion fans globally, just about fetching not even 10 billion pounds. We saw last week with the acquisition of Tottenham Hotspur of one of their main shareholders, Daniel Levy, and his 25% was valued at 7 billion. And that's with Tottenham facing relegation, and has managed to actually almost double the valuation from a year ago. That was 4.5 billion to actually 7 billion. So looking forward to discussing. You've done the intro to the rest of the audience that doesn't know much about me. As Federico said, I'm what I used to call a former and returning athlete. Handball was my thing and is still my thing. Not just now as an athlete, but also involved with building a handball franchise in the US ahead of the LA Olympics. I'm a former football club chairman from the club from which Edin Dzeko came from. And it was interesting because I was messaging with Chiellini on the day of Italy versus Bosnia in Bosnia, sort of applying a light pressure for Italy to go easy on Bosnia. We know the story. Sadly for Italy, even though I predicted Italy to win the World Cup at one of the panel sessions prior to actually them being knocked out, or you guys being knocked out from my native Bosnia. But that's football. I think we saw with Qatar equalizing against Switzerland that the ball is round and anything happens. And, last but not least, worth mentioning in terms of my sort of love for sports, all three of my children are young elite athletes on England player pathway to play hockey for the country. The boys are still doing football, as I was at the time, doing football and handball until I was 14. They're pursuing the same two sort of prong approach. So for me, to Federico's point, sport is a way of life. Of course, it's a huge business opportunity, investment opportunity. Federico made a valid point. The ecosystem of sport is much, much wider than just a club, than just a national team. It's serviced by absolutely everyone. We talk about insurance companies, travel companies, tech companies. There's absolutely everyone that's servicing the ecosystem of sport, whether it's inside the stadium, outside of the stadium, with the fans that are global. And I think we're seeing the huge emergence of ancillary ecosystems and verticals such as medtech and health tech, fintech and AI, and the climate tech being very much part of the ecosystem. So Federico, over to you. Happy to answer, obviously, the questions that you have and engage the audience as well.
Yeah, sure. I think your start was promising in Italian, so we could have gone on with Italian, but then, of course, it's much better in English for you. So let's go on like this. So I had 5 topics today,
Okay,
which is a lot. I understand, but they're all important. So one is sports tech investment. So what's changing in the investment scene of sports tech? And the other one, which is huge, is we are seeing a lot of technology developed for athletes, for elite sports, which is now applied to ordinary people like us. Now, we consider, for example, Aura Ring as an example. It's been applied, or Whoop applied to elite athletes. So now every one of us can use it to improve their own performance during everyday life. Okay. And this is important. And I know you would like to expand this to the not underprivileged sector of the population and society. So we potentially we could apply high level technology to underprivileged sector of society, which is big. Athletes, the role of athletes are becoming more and more founders and entrepreneurs, which is interesting because things are changing. Investments in sports, meaning private equity funds, foreign entities purchasing, especially Italian football. More than a half of the Italian Serie A clubs are owned by foreign families or private equity funds. Why is this? What is the return of investment in your opinion? And what is it a win-win for everyone? And what should happen to make them happy and us happy? So many different things. Telecommunication, how I know you're very much in let's say at ease with this topic. So media and sports. So there are many different things. So the first point is that you told me that London is becoming the main hub for tech in Europe. Of course, even if it's Brexit, we know it's not European community per se, but it's still in the continent. And so we might see London becoming, let's say, the third spot for sports tech after the North America and Asia Pacific, which is very good as a piece of news. Lots of investments, $17 billion invested in sports tech, in tech, just in 2025. So I know it's much. Samir, pick one of this topic and let's get started.
Yeah. Where do I start? I think you mentioned multiple areas and topics, but let's start. I mean, I was last week at the London Tech Week. I think you and I spoke the week before that, where London claimed the kind of capital of tech investment and unicorns from Paris only last month. And it's interesting because many people read newspapers and read reports on London going through all sorts of issues and with a new government and non-dom taxes. And we've lost, I think, 11,000 millionaires in the first year of the new government coming into because of the taxation that wasn't favorable anymore to many of these, foreign, local kind of foreign investors and families who have moved out. I think Dubai and Switzerland and Italy, actually Milan, have been the beneficiaries of the changes of the government. But what's interesting about London, and as you mentioned, I've lived here for almost 35 years now, so this is my home. My kids were born here, they're schooled here. So really, you've got to understand the ecosystem around London. It really attracts people and investors from all around the world. You mentioned the point that Italy and Italian football clubs are, owned or co-owned by the foreign investors. The same is with the English Premier League clubs in particular. I think we've seen a huge surge of the Middle Eastern and American investors in the last 5 to 10 years. Prior to that, there was some Chinese and Asian investment that was coming in. And that's a kind of the big benefit of London. You have some of the most powerful families from around the world that have set up their family offices or their offices in general. They look at London and Britain more broadly, not just what happens with taxation, but all the other infrastructure from the schooling and education to all the opportunities when it comes down to meeting people from around the world. It is a real melting pot of international community, regardless of who's in power, regardless of economical downturn, regardless of a lack of safety and security than some claim in central London, because with 11,000 millionaires, many bodyguards and security companies that have been servicing them have also left. But London, you got to look at in the much longer time frame. And I think this is where what's happening around London, and I often attend roundtable discussions, especially to do with sports tech. There's a huge interest from individual players, ultra high net worth, to family offices, to institutional investors in sports. Now, why? Because unlike any other industry, sports commands the emotional attachment between the fans, so end consumers, and the sporting property and or national team. So we all know that every single person in particular country supports the national team in multiple sports, but then they also have a very strong communities around individual clubs and individual sports. And we also know that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are consuming content around sports in a very, very different way to our generation and generation of our fathers and grandfathers. So because of expectations, demand, interests, and the consumption behavior, we are actually still very much in the infancy stages of what's happening around the power of technology, its implementation inside the sports ecosystem, and what the sports tech founders are doing. Now, the biggest challenge sports tech founders are having, and this is a discussion inside the family office and the investment ecosystem, is that they often build a nice to have, not a must have. Why? Because many founders I find in sports tech space don't really come from a sports background and or don't really fully understand what moves the needle inside the sports ecosystem, which is why they go off building something that's a nice to have, but it's not must have. And they also don't realize that the sports industry also needs a great deal of education, which is why I think these discussions are useful, because we still need to educate and empower the C-suite of the sporting properties, whether it's a football clubs, basketball clubs, any sport, rugby clubs, to understand today's day and age and understand the power of data and understand the power of technology. Because in most cases today, apart from the business of football, you are also running a media tech innovation type company. But what's lacking is actually the knowledge base and the understanding of that at the top level. And which is why there is a huge amount of disparity between innovation and the sports ecosystem. There's still a very, very few clubs, and you and I both went to Juventus, and we've seen what Carolina has achieved with the Juve Innovation Lab, and they're approaching it very seriously, but they have the backing of the C-suite and understanding of the C-suite. And still, with Juve being, one of the biggest Italian brands, not just in sport, but in general terms, it's not easy and it's not straightforward. So now think of smaller clubs that have a lack of budgets and lack of understanding, lack of support from ownership structure on the C-suite. It's not easy. So we need to continue communicating, exchanging ideas, empowering every stakeholder into the ecosystem, and translating and interpreting what technology innovation is supposed to do for the benefit of the clubs, and why fans first and athletes first approach is absolutely essential for it to work. And this is where I guess we can dig deeper into the notion of athletes coming in as investors, but also as operators and entrepreneurs, and what's really happening in that whole ecosystem.
Well, thank you, Samir, for the start. I think it's a really good kickoff. So on one hand, if I follow your concepts, on one hand, sports and football and sports is reluctant to innovate. It's something that it's, even though we're talking about media companies, tech companies, if you will, everyone is reluctant to innovate because they're focused, or we are focused much more on the sports side and the, let's say, the results of the next game. On the other hand, which is good and to share, founders are not well prepared in terms of launching or solutions that are catered to what sports need. So it's a big thing. So on one hand, the market is not really receptive, if you will, or and on the other, the offer side, it's not really on target sometimes. But I want to focus on this. You mentioned Juventus, and Juventus, we all know Juventus because we work with Juventus. They're doing good things in innovation, and despite, so now I don't want to judge, but I don't know if you know, the recent decision was to change the management. So there was a change in management and a new management coming in. Mm-hmm. I'm not judging, but of course it's a restart of the process. We know that the former management was supportive of this innovation project. Let's see what happens, and we really hope that the new ones will be supportive. But in any case, why innovation, why tech, why technology, innovation, startups are important to solve the main questions that we posed in the beginning? Or what's the relationship between saying, okay, sports is not monetizing enough, we are lagging behind, there's a big potential of what we call appropriability, the ability of take a bigger fraction of that passion that you mentioned in the beginning, and how technology solutions, startups, tech companies, culture in between can help answer that big question. I know it's difficult, but
I mean, the main reason why, because most sporting properties around the world are struggling financially. I mean, if you ask every football club, basketball club, handball club, rugby club, they will all tell you that they don't have enough financial resources and capital to be more competitive on the pitch, to be sort of more advanced in terms of the infrastructure they're building. But why is that? Is because, you just mentioned Juventus and the change of management. That's unfortunately the case with lots of sporting properties, not just in Italy and England, but around the world. Management and the CEOs, in lots of cases, go around clubs, and when the better opportunity comes, they jump. If they haven't delivered according to what the board expects them, they get fired, and they just keep on going around from club to club to club to club. And not dissimilar to politicians that have a mandate to do something that they're supposed to do, and they've kind of used that in their kind of election manifesto. They come into power, and from day one they're thinking of the next elections. So hence they really start ignoring what the promise was when they were actually sworn in to be elected. Sport is not dissimilar in the sense that we don't have managers staying in the position long enough. We definitely don't have CEOs staying in a position long enough. And in most of the cases, they believe, in my opinion, wrongly, that the performance on the pitch is the most important thing for the viability of the club. No, the performance on the pitch is very important to please your fans, but the performance in the boardroom and on your balance sheet and in your P&L is actually more important to be able to ultimately bring silverware to the club, get better players, be more competitive. And what they're not realizing is that now for years, they've been leaving too much money on the table by actually pushing the social media platforms such as Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc., where they don't own content, they don't own data, and they're giving it everything to trillion-dollar businesses, thinking that's the way they can engage their fans. Instead, they ought to start thinking that if they build their own tech stack, often in partnerships with other tech providers, not themselves internally, because they will have an issue of having a CTO and running a tech company inside their own environment because they don't have the skill set. It's a different business model to actually run, but they can do that with, this is why startups and scale-ups exist, to help sporting properties and sports industry actually shorten the gap between the money that's been left on the table and the money that's actually being generated through their own tech stack and ecosystem they would build. In that instance, we are talking about totally different value proposition on so many different levels. There is a reason why platforms are valued at the level they are, and they will never command the relationship the sporting properties have with their fans, i.e., their consumers. The thing is, they not engage them in the right way. In the second instance, they're relying too much on match day sales, whether it's a food and beverage, whether it's a tickets. They're relying too much on the sponsorship deals. Now, the problem with sponsorship these days, sponsors have actually realized that their own ROI has been very poor for decades. They are now insisting on clubs being more digitalized, clubs being more sort of Gen Z, Gen Alpha aware and savvy in relation to that sort of exchange of value. And they are now demanding for their own investment for all of that infrastructure to change. And I think this is where, and you mentioned the fact that, my involvement with telcos and Deutsche Telekom in particular, working very closely with some of their portfolio sponsorship assets, has actually led to some of these clubs that would have never, probably for another 5+ years, considered building their own fan engagement platform, building their own engagement and activation capabilities for their sponsors and partners. If it hadn't been for Deutsche Telekom in this instance, or sponsors in general, they would have left it. Why? Because they always have that issue of understanding what it is that technology and data is supposed to do. But even for your existing sponsors, if you know your fan, there's a notion, know your fan, create a fan ID, actually use the power of technology and AI to personalize relationship between you and your fans, rather than treat them through various push notifications in a very kind of arrogant way. Here it is, buy this, buy that, here's a bit of a discount. That's not the way 2026 sort of fandom really operates. So that's why this has to change. It's hard, it's challenging, it lacks all sorts of attitudes to make it work, but it's slowly moving in the right direction. And the main reason is because some of the ownership structures around sporting properties understand the power of data and power of technology, because that's where they made their money. And they're actually now stipulating and demanding from their C-suite and their senior management to start deploying some of these innovative solutions.
In the meantime, I'm writing notes, and I think if we turn these sentences from negative to positive, we can come up with a recipe for, I would say, closing that gap that we posed in the main question. I know it's difficult, but maybe at the end we can, when we sum up, Samir, we can do just a check of the things that are very interesting and coming up from this conversation with you. How about athletes? You were mentioning athletes. I am a former athlete. You are an athlete as well. And I believe we should have a bigger role in the industry, not just as a, let's say, protagonists, I would say, main characters of this movie, but as pillars of the industry, if you will. What's your take on this, and how do you see this landscape of people, athletes, changing? And could they be one of the tools that we could use to close the gap with other industries, and especially leverage all these powerful potential value of the audience that we still have?
100%. I often compare elite athletes and successful entrepreneurs and founders in relation to the skill set they actually both possess. Because to become an elite athlete of any sport, you've got to have that grit, that resilience, that sort of perseverance, the ability to really bounce back, because nothing is a straight line. From the young age when they start, 4, 5, 6 years old, then to actually getting through all sorts of different categories to make it to the sort of seniors in the end, and represent the country, or be on top of the world in whether it's in tennis. It's hugely challenging, and they really understand what it takes to build, in their instance, career. Hence, they really understand what it takes to build a company, and they can also that resonates really well with the founders. So I'm seeing more and more founders and athletes joining forces when it comes down to the investments. I think this is a new phenomenon only in the last 10 years, that for the first time we're actually seeing athletes coming in during their careers and soon after they've retired as investors. I think historically that was never the case, and we know so many horror stories. Within a few years from actually retiring, there would be no more money left from 10, 15 years of their career. So that's luckily changing, because there is a real understanding of athletes that unless they do something about their own future, nobody will really look after them when they're no longer at the top of the game. And that's been something that we are lucky and privileged to be witnessing, because historically athletes have paid the ultimate price of being poorly treated by agents, even in some instances by clubs. Not dissimilar to how historically musicians and artists have been sort of treated in the past, when it comes down to the world that controlled the market making. Now we're seeing that alignment between the two. We're seeing the likes of Federer, Djokovic, Ibrahimovic, Chiellini, obviously with Georgia, we spent some time. I was recently sort of discussing even what Saul Campbell is doing in relation to actually scouting and coaching and AI. Athletes are now, as to your point, starting to realize that yes, we can invest, but also we can build. We can build because we have got the understanding of this whole journey better than anybody else. Now, it doesn't mean if you played football or basketball, you'd be also a great coach. Doesn't mean if you played a sport at the top level, you will also be a great founder, but you can definitely bring so much to the table. And I think, being successful is all about team. Winning is all about team. Even with your individual player, and let's use an example of tennis, you have a team behind you. Yes, you go and perform on the court, but the team behind you is what makes you top and one of the best in the world. Being a successful founder is also about a team. It's also about picking every team member sort of in the right way, not letting your ego of being a former England captain or sort of Arsenal captain, get in the way of you not being able to adapt to new skill set and the new industry that you're learning about. It's great to be passionate about, but at the same time, business and venture building has certain rules, certain processes, and certain systems. And everyone in there who wants to be successful has got to also adhere to these. So it's exciting. It's very much long overdue to see what's happening there. But I think we're only seeing the infancy stages of athletes playing a vital role in venture building.
Well, I always mention Matteo Flamini when I talk about this with people, and saying that Matteo Flamini was a great player, undoubtedly, but at the same time, he's a great founder. He has founded this biotech company and is becoming a billionaire, not thanks to football, but thanks to his, I would say, entrepreneurial spirit, together with an Italian entrepreneur, by the way. So totally these points are very sensitive for me as a former athlete. I usually refer to this as superpowers of athletes. Sometimes athletes don't know they have these powers. So this is a first point. So we need to work on culture and education towards them to make them understand not all athletes, but there's a good good chunk of this athlete that can play a bigger role in society and business. Think just one data from the Harvard Business Review. I read an article saying that there's a good number of female managers, top managers in the US that are coming from sports, being former athletes. So there's also data supporting these ideas. Last point before opening to the questions. We are just 20 minutes shy of the hour, so I'm sensitive and we are aware of the time. We need to stop at 1 p.m. Samir, which I think the social impact of technology, starting from sports, elite sports, and impacting different verticals, and especially, I'd say, people that don't usually have the money or the access to this technology. How do you see this development? And can this, again, be another ingredient in the recipe to become, as a sport, to become more sustainable as an industry overall? So not look at the top of the pyramid, but see how we can expand and apply technologies and innovation that is tested in elite sports to the overall society and see how this can benefit the overall sports system. How do you see this? I know you're very aware and sensitive of what's happening, for example, in prisons or people underprivileged sector of society, but how do you see this development?
I mean, social impact is hugely important to all of us. And I'm a big sort of promoter of sports as a social impact platform, actually even more than anything else. And I remember over the last couple of decades, I've been also vocal about the fact that purpose and impact go hand in hand with profitability. I think far too many people think if you want to be impactful, you can't be as profitable, which is, in my opinion, a sort of absolutely nonsense. The work I'm actually doing with King's College London is very much in relation to what a top academic institution with its medtech accelerator could do inside the sports ecosystem. And we're starting this whole journey where already a sort of clinical trials have been done on AI and concussions with Irish Rugby, very successfully looking at their former players, existing players, and the grassroots level players, how we can address a concussion issue. Now, we know the concussion during the rugby match, football match, or any other match is something that, if undiagnosed, or if we don't have the tool to get the right decision, could affect the match, number one, but could also affect the life and well-being on that particular athlete because the tools weren't there to diagnose it in real time. We also know that the kids on the playground are sort of falling over, on the school ground are falling over, and they are sort of experiencing concussions. So we know that, from looking at the elite sport, in this instance rugby, but also football and all the other sports across Ireland and England, we are coming back to the everyday life of our youth, our youngsters, our older population. And this is what really kind of drives me to we're going to organize a roundtable with the chief medical officers of the Premier League, the FA, the sort of Premier League clubs, rugby clubs, F1 teams, to really understand what's missing in relation to injury prevention and injury recovery inside the sports ecosystem at the top level. Now, as you said, Federico, earlier, my ambition is then to bring all of that into prisons and into the underprivileged part of the society that can't afford to access that level of innovation, technology, and solutions for their mental and physical well-being. Because what is the point of widening the gap of haves and have-nots, of the wealthy and the poor? I think the gap is gone so radically wide as it stands, that we need more solutions, we need more projects, we need more sort of agendas that are driving that gap and closing that gap more and more. Now, it doesn't take an individual, it takes a sort of, I guess, concerted effort of in a cooperative, collaborative way to do that. A former owner of Arsenal, David Dean, has set up a charity where he goes on tours around prisons in the UK, and he talks about the power of football and how that can re-educate the prisoners that are in there for different and various reasons. I don't believe that anyone born today wants to end up behind bars. I think there are circumstances that determine why people end up where they end up, including prisons. And it doesn't mean if you end up in prison, that's the end of the story for you. I think I was 2 weeks ago at the mental health conference where we talk about the fact that depression and anxiety, or depression and anxiety, that led to the highest level of suicidal rates in Britain and in the Western Hemisphere, is now the biggest killer of men under 35 and under 50 in Britain. And it's the biggest killer of teenagers in Britain as well. If we don't address the issue around well-being, and this is why sport is so important, because yes, billionaires own sporting properties, but billions who are not billionaires, who are very much just ordinary citizens, are consuming it. And that's where the solution of getting the balance right between using the power of elite sport and bringing and building a better, healthier, and a more prosperous society in the community. So we, as operators and practitioners in sports, must do everything we can to positively impact the change on the local level. And I think no matter how big or small the project is, coming down to the sort of your local community, your local neighborhood, and making an impact. And often we talk about in mental health capacity. I'm going to visit the royal family's foundation that is run by Prince William and Princess Kate actually this week, to talk about all the work they've done in relation to mental health. And look, she's involved with Wimbledon, he's involved with the FA, and they are big supporters of sport, but they're also big supporters of mental health. Last thing on that, athletes have been a huge difference in discussing mental well-being when it comes down to sort of impact it has. So the more we can do in those segments, the better the community and society that we're going to leave to our children and the next generation.
Well, great. Again, I'm taking notes because I want to then wrap up together and maybe do a next session, maybe in the near future with you, because I know this topic is huge, and we're touching so many, for me at least, interesting points and for the future of this industry. Let me see if there's anyone who wants to ask one or more questions to Samir, or just share your thoughts with us.
Federico, posso fare un intervento?
Certo, Angelo.
Italiano più chiaramente o inglese più
Come, as you like it, within my translation, if you will.
Our sport industry that is having this transition to sustainability is linked with the fashion industry that is as well having a very important transition to sustainability, and how these two industries work to have a social impact, because we looked at the superhero, the super sport hero are changing. Now they are communicating as not only as a result, but with their behavior, and how these two very important industry for our children, for our youth, are working together to have a social impact.
Thank you, Angelo, for the question. I didn't mention fashion, but fashion is definitely one of the adjacent, I would say, ancillary, how would you say, connected business or sectors or economy to sports. And I think it's interesting to understand if they can join forces to make our society and world a better place in terms of sustainability. I know we've seen and we see a lot of projects around this connection between sustainability, fashion, and sports, but it's still at its infancy, I would say. Samir, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, Angela, great question. I think retail sector and this fast fashion is probably more guilty of climate change issues that we're facing probably than the airplanes and sort of oil industry and the industries that everyone's just jumping at, including obviously AI, that's going to be consuming a huge amount of energy in the process. We are seeing initiatives with the major fashion houses and also with the major sports entities and stadiums. I'm very closely discussing the ESG component inside sports with CFO of Johan Cruyff Arena. And as you might know, Johan Cruyff houses Ajax, but also houses some of the biggest music concerts in Europe, where the likes of Bruno Mars and Harry Styles would book the arena for 10 to 12 concerts in a row as their European tour rather than going around. And I know that every quarter they host, together with UEFA, they host ESG related one-day conferences where they've got the likes of Juventus, they've got the likes of Tottenham Hotspur, they've got the likes of Borussia Dortmund. So some of the biggest stadiums and the biggest football clubs are driving the importance of climate tech, which goes across the board from your sort of daily travel of the fans into the stadium and the way in which they actually commute and create emissions in the process, all the way to what food and beverage is being served at the stadium. So I was at the Sports Tech Nation Federico conference, not last year, the year before. And I was on the stage with the guys who talked about the fact that if a football stadium would replace beef burger by chicken burger for only 2,000 fans on the menu, they would be able to power the entire stadium for the duration of the entire match. I mean, a tweak of a meat type makes a huge difference on energy saving and sustainability. Fashion houses that are producing out of Asia and shipping everything and selling it to us for 5 or 10 or 15 pounds are really, really the sort of businesses and the industry that needs to massively revolutionize the ways in which they doing things. I understand that profitability is dictating everything, but we need to bring purpose and impact into profitability and the bottom line. Until we do that, we will continue facing natural disasters, sadly, and we will continue sort of playing a catch up with the climate change. I think we also know inside the climate tech ecosystem that unless things change and improve, nothing will be insurable at 2050. So in less than 25 years, the insurance industry will collapse. Like in the US, in certain states, nothing can no longer be insured because of the fires and all the other natural disasters. We are actually not going in the right direction on that front. And again, sports can make a huge difference by incentivizing fans around the world to be more sustainable. I don't think we should only look up to the big corporates, big employers. I think we need education on the ground level. Udinese in Italy in Serie A is probably the most sustainable football club when it comes down to activations they're doing in and around the stadium in Udinese. So I think there are some lighthouses and some great use cases that we need to see more
of. Thank you, Samir. Angela, I hope Samir replied in the right way for you. And so there's a time for another quick question. I don't know if anyone over. Giuseppe.
Thank you, Federico. My question, maybe it's a little provocative, but I want to see if if I interpret it properly, kind of the vision that Samir shared about sport organizations, and based also on what I know of Samir's work, but uh, we often talk about sports clubs becoming media and technology businesses, but many are still run by people whose expertise is primarily in sporting rather than commercial or digital, right? And is the real challenge from your perspective in sports today not necessarily a lack of technology or funding, but rather a shortage of executives who know how to build product-centric organizations? Is that, like, have I summarized well kind of the message that you shared at the beginning?
100%, Giuseppe. And, I often use the example of Burnley, which got relegated again from the Premier League. But what they've got right, their CFO is a former investment banker who used to be the CCO of Everton, tried to acquire Everton the last time with his investment group. It didn't work out. But they brought in a CTO as a former fintech guy from the city to build a tech stack. They launched their own innovation lab. In addition, for EFL has also launched there. And they really are on the forefront of understanding the power of technology and how they want to resolve all sorts of issues to do with the club's brand identity, the fan base, the international fan base, the ability to service their fans outside of the season, outside of the match days, because let's face it, clubs like Burnley will, until they've fully integrated into the Premier League ecosystem longer than a season or two, will probably always struggle with that ability to compete with the bigger clubs in terms of the transfer window. So they understand that you need deep pockets to stay up. But until you get deep pockets, and they recently acquired Espanyol in La Liga, so they're building their MCO infrastructure to maybe create a bit of a feeder system between the two. They're doing things right in terms of the human capital, to your point, Giuseppe. Unfortunately, most clubs are not there yet, but we are seeing that changing with the investors that are coming from the United States in particular, and the Middle East to a certain extent as well, because they understand that power of the executive management that needs to understand things beyond just the business of football or business of sport in general, because there's just so many more opportunities for revenue generation and also engagement and the ability to service your global fan base, because no stadium is big enough. Even the one that Manchester United will build with 100,000 seats, it's not big enough for their 1.2 billion fan base around the world. So what do you do in order to cater for these fans around the world? You've got to build engagement tools and ecosystem that goes beyond the match day.
Federico, am I okay asking a follow-up question?
Yeah, sure.
So this is, I agree 100%. So thanks for validating my understanding of your position that you shared at the beginning. But I lived in the US 15 plus years, and I worked for a company called Huddle that works with organizations from the top level, Burnley and others, all the way to youth teams. So I would like to also get your perspective that I often see with Huddle, we often see that technology can definitely improve performance and efficiency, but proving the financial ROI, even for the executives of those businesses, remains challenging. So my question for you is, what evidence or metrics will convince investors, but especially executives, that professionalization and technology adoption can create enterprise value for those mid-market sports organizations? So not necessarily the big stadium owners, but I have 3,000 people in the arena, 5,000 people in the stadium. So kind of those second, third, fourth division football teams, or top level handball in certain regions, volleyball, basketball, and such. Are we too far from thinking in that direction?
I mean, I don't know, Giuseppe, if you've come across a concept called 1,000 True Fans.
Yeah. Okay.
It's basically what that means. In order, you don't need to have millions of fans to create a network effect. You need 1,000 super fans that will really follow the direction of the club in relation to what the club wants to achieve, and will become the club's biggest ambassadors, in then infecting in a positive way, a couple of thousand more or thousands of others around there. I think the ROI question is a tricky one, because you can't quantify everything in tech, especially at the very early stages of adoption. So I think you need the executives to actually see also intangible value in what tech brings to the table. They need to understand what it means to resolve your silo environment, because everything is so siloed inside the sports ecosystem, not just sports, in the corporate environment as well. So if you want to centralize your data lakes, you want to centralize create your CRM, you want to create and really understand your fans. You want to allocate a fan ID behind each fan. You want to segment the sort of consumption around them or their interests. You want to treat them in a personalized way, which is obviously the power of AI is able to do. You want to give them snippets and highlights rather than give them the whole thing because they may not have time. If you have that kind of understanding to approach tech in a holistic way, that is there to be your facilitator of the newly formed relationships and maintain those relationships beyond your expectations of the loyalty, just because they support your club because the father and grandfather and everyone else in the family has done that. The Gen Z and Gen Alpha now support 6.3 sports. They follow athletes. They no longer just follow clubs by default. And we've seen with the notion of Messi, Ronaldo, and Neymar, with 2.1 billion fans combined or supporters around them, versus the World Cup, the sort of FIBA, FIFA, NFL, NHL with 415 million. We actually, they've got to understand what is happening. It's an educational process. We are struggling with having the executives there with that, depth of knowledge and the ability to see beyond the cost. Every investment in technology should be a profit center, not a cost center. Yes, it might cost upfront, but you're not building a tech company that will cost you hundreds of thousands or early millions just to build it, without even then creating revenues. So they're better off immediately, as long as they have the understanding what it is that they're buying, what they're buying into, and they've got to be big believers in that being the right thing for their club.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe and Samir, for the questions. Thank you, everyone. I think we are at the end of this very interesting Wylab Innovation Talks. To sum up, difficult to sum up because it's like very big topics. We should do one Wylab Innovation Talk for each of these topics, but we don't have the time to do it. We might think of something like this, Samir, in the future, but we talked about continuity of management, which is something that honestly we are not seeing. Culture of innovation, stability, ownership, taking the ownership of the IP in sports. What else? Knowing the fan. So sports as a social impact platform, which is connected to profitability, if you will. Sports and technology adoption, democratization, and many other things. Of course, education and expertise in the management to understand that they're not managing just a sports team, but something bigger. So I know that I haven't summarized very well everything, but definitely this is recorded, so you can go back, and I will do that. Go back and rewatch this episode. Samir, thank you very much for spending and investing time with us and our community. Thank you, Giuseppe, Angelo, and everyone else for following this episode. And we will come back with another Wylab Innovation Talks just in 1 month's time, always on Monday at 12 p.m. And I hope you can still follow us. Grazie a tutti. Samir, Bocca al lupo per tutto e a tutti voi un abbraccio e ci sentiamo presto.
Grazie a tutti.